Every day seemed ordinary until the silence in his own home began to feel like it was breathing with him. He woke up with the vague heaviness of a dream that had slipped away before he could hold on to it. For a long moment, he lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the apartment pressed in around him, not soothing, not ordinary, but weighted. City apartments are never truly quiet. There are always pipes groaning, neighbors walking, cars rushing below. But that morning it was different. The silence felt alive, as though it wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something waiting. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, rubbed his face, and told himself it was just fatigue. Still, his chest felt tight, his breath a little shallow, as if the air was resisting him. He stood and walked to the blinds. The sunlight streamed in thin, perfect lines across the floor, cutting the shadows into bars. Normally, he welcomed that light. Today, it felt cold, sterile. He lingered at the window, expecting comfort from the sight of the city people walking, buses grumbling, the endless rhythm of life. But his gaze slid to the reflection on the glass. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw someone else standing behind him. He blinked, and it was gone. Only his own reflection remained, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it had been slower than him. Half a breath out of sync in the living room. His books sat stacked on the coffee table, his jacket draped over the back of a chair. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, yet he paused. The jacket sleeve hung differently than he remembered. The books weren't aligned the way he'd left them. He leaned closer, searching for logic. Maybe he had been careless. Maybe memory was tricking him. He laughed under his breath, but the sound was hollow, nervous. He reached for his phone on the table. Before his hand touched it, the screen lit up. No vibration, no message, just the lock screen staring back at him. It was a simple thing, a common glitch, but in the stillness of that room it was devastating. It felt intentional, as though the phone itself had chosen to acknowledge him. He hesitated, hand hovering, pulse drumming in his ears. Finally, he picked it up. The screen went dark instantly, rejecting him. He whispered to himself that it was fine, that he was being ridiculous. Stress, fatigue, nothing more. But he couldn't ignore the sensation prickling at the base of his neck, the primal instinct of being watched. Not by a person, not by something with eyes, but by the apartment itself. He sat on the couch, hands clasped, listening. At first, nothing. Then, as if responding to his focus, the refrigerator hum faltered, stopped, and started again. A pipe clicked twice, too evenly to be random. The air felt charged, like the pause before a storm. He glanced toward the far wall where a mirror hung. His reflection waited there, patient, ordinary. But as he stared, his reflection's eyelids lowered a fraction too late. A delayed blink that unease spread through him like cold water. He stood, pacing, forcing his mind to cling to rationality. Mirrors don't blink out of sync. Phones don't light up by choice. Jackets don't move themselves. Unless something else was at play. Unless this place, the walls, the objects, the very air wasn't inanimate after all. He pressed a hand to the wall. It was cool under his palm, but the longer he held it there, the more certain he became that it wasn't just cool, it was aware. Solid and unyielding, but aware, like skin stretched tight over something vast and breathing. He pulled back, heart racing by the time the clock on the wall ticked once loud. Heavy, final. He knew his world had shifted. He was no longer living in an apartment. He was inside something alive, and it was awake. Morning arrived without comfort. The pale grey light of the city seeped through the blinds, settling into the corners of the apartment like dust. He sat at the small kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug that no longer held warmth. The coffee was bitter, metallic, as if the water had drawn something foreign from the pipes. On the rim of the cup, a faint smear of black ink had appeared overnight. He wiped it with his thumb, but the stain spread, blurring into shapes that refused to hold, form-like words dissolving under water. Everywhere he looked, the familiar was no longer loyal. A framed photograph of his parents, once steady on the shelf, had been rotated to face the wall. The potted plant by the window leaned unnaturally toward the hallway, as if following a draft that did not exist. Books on his desk had shifted, their spines misaligned, a bookmark protruding from a place he had never reached. None of it was violent. It was intimate. Someone or something was editing the details of his life, carefully, deliberately. He tried to leave. Hand on the doorknob, he froze. The hallway beyond the door felt wrong, too still, as though the building itself was waiting. He let go and retreated into the apartment. The air seemed to breathe with him. At 11, he attempted to impose order. He opened his laptop and began documenting everything. The whisper in the dark, the coins, the stains, the rearranged objects. He typed clinically, as though recording symptoms of a patient. Yet the screen seemed to pulse beneath his words, like the apartment was reading over his shoulder, correcting, anticipating. Then came the knock, soft, precise, 3 taps. When he opened the door, the hallway was empty. But on the doormat lay 3 coins, each marked with a sticker. 2 were clear. The letters W and E, the third, was smudged into nothingness. He carried them inside, placing them on the desk. The moment they touched the wood, a photo frame rattled, trembling as though in silent approval. The apartment was demonstrating vocabulary, proving it could answer. His phone buzzed. A message blinked onto the screen. Don't go to the east balcony. It was from a close friend, except when he called to confirm, the friend had never sent it. The words lingered on the display, impossible to erase. He smashed the router on instinct, wires splayed like veins. But even disconnected, the phone lit again. It's okay. We're waiting. At 3 in the afternoon, a new sound emerged. Scratching, faint at first, from beneath the floorboards. He pressed his ear to the wood. The rhythm accelerated scrape. Pause, scrapes, scrapers, if spelling something. Then silence. A drop of moisture landed on his cheek. He looked up. The ceiling was weeping condensation, droplets forming into rows and clusters, a crude binary grid. A message written in water. He began photographing everything, desperate for proof. But when he looked at the photos, they no longer matched reality. The droplets aligned differently, the coins arranged into new orders. Evidence refused to stay still. Darkness fell. He taped objects to shelves, anchored books, tried to resist the edits. Yet by midnight, every tape strip had peeled away, discarded neatly on the floor. The apartment did not fight. It corrected. At 2:17 a.m., he woke to a low hum, deep and resonant, as if the walls were chanting. The rug in the center of the room had become an altar, objects arranged in a perfect circle. At its center lay a Polaroid. His breath froze. The image showed him, standing at the window, coat half on, eyes wide, captured in fear. Around the border, scrawled in faint handwriting, were the words, "Don't run." He dropped the photo, but the whisper rose again, layered, intimate. wrapping around his skull. Tonight is rehearsal. Tomorrow we begin. The lights flickered once, and then silence, vast and complete, as if the entire city had stopped to listen with him. The city outside had grown dimmer. Street lights flickered like faulty neurons, and the usual hum of traffic had thinned into a distant, irregular pulse. Mark's senses had become hyper-tuned, every creak, every shadow amplified. Even the air felt thick, charged with something unseen. He moved through his apartment as if it were a labyrinth designed to test him. He tried to work. Emails, reports, spreadsheets saw meaningless against the backdrop of his own unraveling reality. He typed, deleted, typed again. Each word felt surveilled, each sentence questioned. When he looked up, the furniture seemed subtly shifted, as if it had taken a step toward him while he wasn't watching. The coins, still on the desk, seemed to hum faintly. Their letters, W and E, no longer made sense individually. Together, they felt like part of a code. Mark rotated them, flipped them, but the smudged third coin refused to cooperate. At some point, he realized the coins were not mere objects, they were signals, and he was receiving them imperfectly. At 6 p.m, he tried leaving again. Stepping into the hall, he noticed the walls had been altered subtly. The wallpaper pattern repeated in impossible symmetry, corners sharper than before, shadows deeper, swallowing light. He felt eyes, unblinking, tracing his every movement. He returned inside, heart pounding. Dinner was a ritual of tension. He opened the fridge. Nothing had been moved, yet the milk smelled faintly metallic. He wondered if the apartment was teaching him paranoia, or merely revealing it. The whisper returned, almost gentle. Understand or falter. Hours stretched into a night that seemed to fold in on itself. Mark mapped the apartment meticulously, creating diagrams of furniture, photos, coins. He tried coding the binary patterns from the ceiling condensation into spreadsheets. It was a puzzle, but one that didn't want solving. Each attempt at understanding was met with subtle correction. A photo shifted, a coin flipped, a message appeared where none should exist. Midnight brought new visitors, though no one physically entered. Shadows moved against the walls, intangible yet undeniable. The hum from the coins grew into a resonant tone that filled the room. The Polaroid from earlier had multiplied. Dozens now laid across the rug, each capturing him in subtly different poses, some with eyes wider, some with mouth open in silent scream. The writing on the borders had changed, still not listening. Mark's sleep was impossible. Even in brief dozes, the whispers infiltrated dreams. He would awaken to find the coins rearranged, objects rotated, digital clocks running backward. Reality no longer flowed linearly. It folded, mirrored, and repeated. By 3 a.m., desperation became clarity. He understood the apartment was sentient in some form, and it was not neutral. Every movement, every thought, every hesitation was part of its experiment. But for what end? The question gnawed at him, leaving hollow spaces in his mind where answers should be. The night ended with a single, quiet command, the whisper soft yet piercing, "Tomorrow. You choose." Mark sank into the floor, the apartment pressing around him. He realized choice was an illusion, and yet he could not stop the creeping curiosity. What happened if he acted, or if he failed? The morning arrived with a silence heavier than the night. Mark woke to an unfamiliar stillness. The city beyond the window seemed paused, muted. Even the usual hum of distant traffic was gone. He could almost hear his own heartbeat echoing against the walls of the apartment. The coins, the Polaroids, the condensation patterns, they were waiting. He moved carefully, documenting everything as he went. Each object, each shift in light, was a clue and a threat. The apartment had turned into a labyrinth of psychological torment, where even a glance in the wrong direction could elicit subtle punishments. Doors that were once closed were now slightly ajar, revealing shadows that weren't there moments before. Mark tried calling friends, colleagues, anyone. The lines rang endlessly, then cut off abruptly. Each attempt to reach out to the outside world failed, reinforcing the apartment's dominion over him. Emails sent vanished from his outbox. Notifications appeared from non-existent accounts. Digital reality was now as manipulable as physical reality. At noon, he confronted the Polaroids. Laying them in sequence on the table, he noticed changes. His expressions were evolving, becoming progressively more tense, more fearful. It was as if the apartment could anticipate the emotional state he would enter next, mapping his psyche in real time. The whisper returned, clearer now, layered in tones, commanding and almost human. "You see, but you do not understand." Mark sat, staring at the coins. WE and the smudged third coin. Slowly, he realized they weren't letters, they were coordinates, reference points, markers of a pattern only the apartment could comprehend. He tried to rearrange them, testing sequences, permutations, hoping to trigger a pause or reversal. The apartment responded instantly. Objects shifted to counter him. Shadows stretched to reinforce control. Subtle sounds guided him back to compliance. By evening, Mark's body ached from tension, but his mind was sharpened to a point of obsessive clarity. He began constructing a ritual, a way to communicate, to bargain with the apartment. Notes, diagrams, objects, all carefully arranged, each with a purpose, a message embedded. It was a dialogue, imperfect and one-sided. Night fell, darker than any before. The apartment pulsed with an almost alive rhythm. Objects floated fractionally above surfaces. Shadows bent unnaturally. Whispering grew into a chorus of overlapping voices. He felt watched from all angles, trapped in a multi-dimensional gaze. At 2:42 a.m. A single Polaroid glowed faintly. On it, he saw himself standing in the center of the apartment, coins arranged around him in a perfect circle. On the border, the words, "The final choice awaits." Mark understood. Tomorrow he would be faced with the ultimate decision: obey, resist, or attempt to escape. But each option carried the weight of the apartment's scrutiny. And yet, for the first time, he felt a spark of defiance. He sank to the floor, exhausted, arranging the coins one last time, whispering to himself, "I will choose, even if it means losing everything." The apartment fell silent, listening, waiting. The night stretched into a thick, impenetrable void. Mark sat in the center of the apartment, coins arrayed before him, Polaroids scattered like fragments of a shattered memory. The whispering had grown into a relentless tide, voices overlapping, echoing, layering an orchestra of scrutiny and expectation. The apartment had become sentient, not merely a space but a presence, weighing every thought, every breath, every hesitation. Time had lost its shape. Clocks displayed impossible sequences. Walls stretched and contracted subtly. The floor beneath him seemed to pulse with an almost organic rhythm. Mark's mind, though frayed, had never been sharper. He recognized patterns, signals, repetitions. The apartment was testing him, calibrating him, trying to anticipate his choice. But what choice could he make that wasn't already anticipated? He stared at the coins again. The W and E, the smudged third. They had become a kind of mapper language he almost understood. Moving them in precise sequences, he created a rhythm of his own, a counterpoint to the apartment's manipulations. The whispering hesitated for a fraction of a second. That hesitation was all he needed. Suddenly, the Polaroids began to shift, assembling themselves into a wall of images. Each photograph captured a moment of fear, a glimpse of vulnerability, a reflection of the growing tension inside him. Mark realized the apartment was feeding on his fear, shaping it, amplifying it. The whispers grew frantic, as if realizing their control was waning. Mark's heartbeat thundered in his chest. He rose slowly, placing the coins at precise angles, aligning them with the binary patterns from the ceiling condensation. The apartment reacted instantly. Shadows twisted, light bent, objects trembled, but he held his stance. With a trembling hand, he picked up the glowing Polaroid. On it, the words, "Choose now or surrender forever." He inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of every unseen eye upon him. Every instinct screamed to flee, to obey, to fold, but something inside resisted. He spoke aloud, his voice firm despite the tremor. "I choose myself." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the apartment shuddered. Objects floated, lights flickered, and for the first time, the presence wavered. The Polaroids lifted into the air, forming a halo around him. The coins glowed, and the condensation on the ceiling rearranged itself into a pattern resembling a key. The whispering quieted, as if holding its breath. Mark took a step forward, then another, moving through the room with purpose. The apartment no longer resisted, but seemed to fold around him, yielding subtly, acknowledging his assertion of will. The final Polaroid floated before him, the image shifting to a reflection of his own face, calm and resolute. Across the border, written clearly, "You are free." For now, silence settled over the apartment, thick and complete. The city outside remained muted, waiting. Mark sank to the floor, exhausted, understanding that this victory was temporary. The apartment was patient. It would return, perhaps in another guise, another challenge. Yet for the first time, he felt control, a fragile but undeniable sense of self within the chaos. As dawn approached, he stepped to the window, looking out at a city that seemed both familiar and alien. The whispering had faded, leaving only the memory of its presence, a lingering question of what was real and what was orchestrated. He breathed, steadying himself, aware that the game had changed, that he had survived not by escaping, but by asserting his own will. And somewhere, deep in the architecture of the apartment, a shadow of a voice murmured, "We will meet again." Mark exhaled, letting the tension drain from his body. The apartment remained silent. For now,